Hello and welcome to Culture in Between, a podcast about the unique experiences of growing up in a culture that is different from your parents' culture. So we are Alyssa and Brianna.
Hello.
And we are your hosts, and we are so excited to welcome our first guest. Her name is Ashleigh, and she grew up with an Australian parent, and we are just going to talk a little bit about Australian culture and how growing up with an Australian dad has affected her life. So welcome to the show, Ashleigh. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start right away with just can you tell us where exactly in Australia your dad is from and where did you grow up?
So my dad is from Canberra, which I think is about 5 hours from Sydney, I think. And I grew up in Portland, Oregon. So, yeah.
Wow, okay. And we don't often hear of Australian immigrants coming to America. I feel like a lot of Americans know about Australia only through like movies and TV shows, and not a lot of us have really met an actual Australian person in real life. So, can you tell us how and why, I guess, your dad came to the U.S.?
So my dad, when he was about 21, he was an electrician on a ship. He also did YWAM, which is Youth with a Mission. So I think he had gone down to Mexico for a little bit on a missions trip, and at some point ended up going to Portland. And my mom, her friend had asked her to go down to the docks to, meet the sailors. And so they met. I think they wrote letters for about a year to each other, and then he ended up moving here to get married and stayed.
Wow. That's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, so love kept him around.
Yeah. Like growing up with someone, with a parent from a different culture, and then another parent from, I guess in your case, the same culture, you're still kind of between cultures in a way, yeah, because even though you grow up in this culture and you also have a parent that's from that culture, you still have this whole other side of you. So do you ever feel like you're not like fully of the American culture because you are tied to that Australian culture? Like, what was that like, I guess, growing up, kind of having those two cultures in your household?
Growing up, I think I really identified mostly as an Australian.
Oh.
I was really close to my dad. I still am really close to my dad. So I think that was something that was so deeply special to me that I could share with him. That was different than, outside of my family, the people around us. So also, it's just kind of unique, and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, I think growing up, I really called myself an Australian. Wished I'd lived there all the time.
That's really unique. That's not what I expected, actually.
Yeah, I did not expect that.
And I think I don't feel like I grew up in a household that was American and Australian, because I think my mom really just let that culture kind of be our home. As much as we brought it in. I mean, we did Australia Day. My mom had Australian cookbooks. Outside of that, I don't know that there was anything like super particularly Australian, but I really latched on to that side of my family.
It seems like your mother also like really latched on to the culture as well, and like really adopted it as her own. Can you explain to people who maybe don't know, like what is Australia Day and like what is that? What do you typically do on that day?
So Australia Day, usually there's a big barbecue with lamb and mint jelly and pavlovas and a whole bunch of food, and it's just a day we get together and celebrate. And honestly, I am a terrible Australian because I don't actually remember what Australia Day is. I know it's been explained to me a dozen times, and it's in one ear, out the other. But I know it's fun and important, and we do watch the Australia Day commercials for lamb every year. There's a new one, and it's great.
So I will say, this is a little personal anecdote, is that Ashleigh very kindly invited my husband and I over for Australia Day one time, and I think I do remember watching those commercials, and she has made us pavlova before. It's very, very good. Very sweet. Yeah, so it's a fun experience, definitely. I appreciate you sharing that with us. So
Yeah, and for anyone who has never seen pavlova, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but for anyone who's never seen it, we did have another guest at the party who called it a fruit pizza.
Yeah.
So that is
A good
kind
visual.
of a good visual of it. Yeah. Great. Well, that's really fascinating that you identified so strongly with your dad's culture in that way, that you thought of yourself as actually Australian more than American. Has that changed over time? Do you feel any less tied to Australia now, or no?
I think a little bit. I mean, I would still, like, I'm still very proud of my Australian side. I think I've accepted the fact that I am mostly American. I live here. My husband is very patriotic, and I love him for it. I do try, though, to still expose my kids to our Australian culture. I try to remind them that we have family over there, that their Big Papa is what we call my dad, is from Australia. And I think as they get older, trying to explain Anzac Day and create more dishes in our home that are Australian, and hopefully one day get them over there to meet the rest of the family. It's been our goal for about 5 years.
Yeah.
How much family do you still have in Australia, actually?
So I have my Nana, I have my Aunt Vicky and my Uncle Craig and their family. I think my cousin Troy doesn't live in Australia. He travels quite a bit. I don't keep in touch with my cousins as much as I'd like. I think as much as we love each other, we were never like super close. We were when we were together, and then when we didn't really keep in touch when we were apart. So hopefully next time I see them, it won't be weird. It'll still be family.
Nice.
Yeah. So how many times have you visited Australia, and what were those experiences like, especially when you were younger?
I think when I was younger, we definitely went quite a bit. My mom was a flight attendant, so we were able to travel back and forth pretty frequently, which was amazing. And just, we were so lucky for that. My cousins would make fun of me for being American. They would not think I was Australian at all, which was fair. Rude, but fair. And I think once my Aunt Vicky and my Nana did come to the States, and that was really fun for us. But yeah, going over there was just amazing. To me, it really felt like home, and it just, just so different than being here. The vibe, the culture, the landscape, of course, is very different. Being on the beach is amazing, and yeah, I really do miss it.
Yeah. What's the flight like? Okay, so from Oregon, how long of a flight is that? Or I don't know how it breaks up.
You would have to, in my experience, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't changed, you'll have to fly from Oregon to either LA or San Francisco. I think we usually went through San Francisco. And then from there, go to Australia. So I think it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours down to California, and then 17 hours over to... and I don't know, but we always ended up in business class, which was really nice.
Wow, okay. Yeah, that is nice.
Hey, that's great for a long distance.
Yeah.
I remember my mom would always make us wear our Sunday best and say, you need to behave. So they'll put us in business class. Because I think we always went on standby. That was because she was a flight attendant, we were on standby. And yeah, we would try to sit very well behaved and in our nice little dresses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that holds up, because I had a friend of mine whose mother was also a flight attendant, I believe. Yeah, she used to wait on standby a lot. So did you ever live in Australia for any period of time?
I lived there when I was in college for only about 8 months. I got to college late, and then I left, and I never went back, which was not my plan. So I went to the School of Ministry at Oxford Falls, which is connected to our church, Christian City Church. And I went for their acting course, and it was fun, and it was amazing, and I loved the whole experience. But I was very, very broke, and the school term ended, I believe, in December. So my mom was like, we're bringing you home for Christmas. I'm like, please don't bring me home for Christmas. I cannot afford to come back.
Right. And
but they did it anyways, and I ended up starting a relationship with my husband and married him and did not go back. So
What was your experience like when you were there? I know you before you visited a lot, but living there, did it kind of live up to what you hoped it would, or do you miss it?
I do miss it. I think it did meet my expectations more or less. I think, I was about 19 when I moved there, and I was living with my sister, but she traveled a lot and she was kind of out of the house quite a bit. So I was kind of living on my own. And I think for anyone who goes off on their college experience, that's just so much going on and so many exciting new things, and you're on your own. So I feel like that overlapped quite a bit of the experience of actually living there for the first time. But I do miss getting to just hop on a bus and go to the beach. I used to go down to Darling Harbor and take a ferry to Manly Wharf and just walk around all over the place and do shopping and get to eat at my favorite restaurants.
That's awesome.
I think my favorite thing too was, because I only took the bus, was taking the bus down to Mona Vale, which is about where I lived. And there was a chip shop, and I would get sandwich bread, ketchup, and chips with French fries. And I would go home and make a chip sandwich.
That sounds good. Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like it's a very, because I assume you didn't have a car. It sounds like you said, okay, but it's a place where you can take the bus, I guess, or public
I feel like the public transportation was really easy, especially as a student. It was like really cheap for us. So
awesome. Yeah. And I didn't ever thought, I guess, yeah, if you're going there at 19, you're kind of, on your own for the first time, figuring all that out, that makes sense that maybe, yeah, that's a lot as well. Because I know when I was going off to college, and I mean, I just went to Nashville, Tennessee for school, and I felt like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? So I can only imagine if, going to a different country, even if you are familiar with it in somewhat, does that make sense? Yeah.
And were you living in the same city as like where your dad's family is from, or were you in a different city?
So my dad's family, a lot of them still live in Canberra, and my nana at the time was living in Ulladulla, which was quite a ways from where I was. I was in Sydney. So the only family I really had close to me, like I said, was my sister, my older sister, but we just didn't really see each other as much as you'd think for people who live together.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, that's really great that you had that experience, even if it was just for 8 months. Yeah, that's really cool. So I wanted to kind of go back to when you were younger. So as I said, I feel like Australia is kind of one of those fascinating countries for Americans. So when you were growing up and you told people that your dad was from Australia, what was their reaction?
As kids, most people would ask me to say banana.
Oh my gosh, really?
Like immediately. But I wouldn't, because one, that's embarrassing, and two, I'm like, I don't think my accent's that strong. So, like, I think I can tell for myself, I know which words come out with an Australian accent and which ones don't, and banana is not one of them.
Right.
So and I think as I got older, though, it comes up in conversation. My husband swears up and down that he does not hear my accent, but other people do. So they'll ask me where I'm from, and I'll kind of hesitantly mention Australia, because the first thing they'll say is, "Oh, I've always wanted to go," and I'm like, "Well, you should." There's no reason not to, except for how much it costs to get there. But yeah, I think I'm proud of it to be Australian, and I don't mind having the conversation, but it is, for me, it's almost embarrassing because, like I think you've mentioned, I don't feel like I fit in one category. I'm not really, I'm not Australian enough to be Australian. I'm not American enough to be American.
Yes.
In between.
That is what this podcast is about, because we feel the same way.
Yeah, and it's so funny that like you mentioned that some people hear your accent and some don't, because like I think I knew you before. So just for people who know, Ashleigh and I used to go to church together, and like I think I met you first, and I didn't actually catch on to the accent. We had, I think, gone out to eat lunch and all these things plenty of times. So when my then boyfriend had come up to visit, he was like, "Oh, I think is she Australian?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know." Like I was like, I've been around her so many times, but my husband was able to like recognize like off the bat, I think that you had that accent. So I think that's kind of interesting that some people are able to pick up on it so easily, and then others can't. So I don't know. Yeah. So
Yeah, I think for me, and maybe you can speak to this too. Like, it sound for me. I think I heard you said certain words that we don't say, as like chips. That seems like a very natural, like in your vocabulary. So I feel like that's more what would give it away for me. Have you found that you use like certain Australianisms in your like everyday language? I guess.
A little bit. I think definitely when I had moved back from Australia, I think there were a lot of words that I'd picked up that were such natural conversation for me that when I came back, I'm like, that's not a word people use here. I don't think so much now. Like I said, especially I don't live near my dad anymore. So having conversations with him, I'm not hearing that Australian slang as much as I probably did living at home. So I do feel like I've lost that a bit, which bums me out. But
I just think that's really cool that you picked it up in the first place.
Yeah.
Because our parents have, well, I don't really hear their Jamaican accents that much, but but I have friends who tell me that it's very strong, but and we didn't pick up anything. But maybe some incorrect pronunciations. I did learn that in college that I say certain things kind of incorrectly, but other than that, yeah. So I think that's really neat that you even picked up a little bit of an accent in the first place. So
yeah. Okay, so I believe you mentioned having siblings. Do you feel like your siblings feel the same way about your Australian culture as you do? Do they feel as tied to Australia as you do?
I think so. I mean, at one point or another, each one of us has lived there. So I think we do all individually identify as Australian citizens. We do have dual citizenship, which is really fun and easy for traveling. So I think for my brother, though, specifically, he really identifies with the Scottish side of our family, which I am not super familiar with. I know my granddad is from Scotland. Whereabouts, I couldn't tell you, but Preston has found our family crest. I think he's found a castle. He's done a lot of research into the Scottish side of our family, which is awesome. We've all dreamt of going there and trying to find some of our family. I think we have some distant relatives still over there.
Wow.
cool.
That my Nana may or may not be in touch with. I'm not sure. But yeah, so we have... all of us do identify as Australian, mostly, and a small part of me is Scottish, but not enough that I would really announce that.
Yeah.
I love that you call your grandma Nana.
Yeah, that's
precious.
adorable. Yeah. And with the dual citizenship, is that something that you all have always had? And is that also something that your kids could have as well?
Yes, I believe my kids can get it. So we all got our dual citizenship, I believe, about the time my twin sister and I turned 18. I think it's possibly when Chelsea was moving. She got her dual citizenship, so we all got ours. Fun fact about that, when I did get my dual citizenship, my name was written differently on my birth certificate as every other document in my life.
Oh my gosh.
I think on my birth certificate it was spelled EY, but everything else was EIGH because that is the Australian spelling.
Okay.
And the Australian government was the only one to flag it, so I got denied, and I had to legally change the spelling of my name and then reapply for my passport. So
Wow.
Okay.
That was
my
fun.
gosh.
I did not know that was the Australian spelling.
Me either.
Okay, because I don't see Ashleigh spelled that way very often. That's interesting. Okay, the more you know.
Interesting. Yeah. I've always wondered why there are multiple spellings of Ashley, but now that makes a lot more sense.
I think technically the EY spelling is a boy's name, or considered a boy's name.
Really? Okay.
Very interesting. And you kind of touched on this earlier, but you mentioned you have kids now, and you try to make sure that they're still kind of connected to your Australian culture. So can you maybe talk about that a little bit more? How have you passed down some of what you were raised with as far as Australian culture to your kids, and has it affected how you raise your kids too? Do you feel like your kids are being raised a different way than maybe like a typical American parent would raise them?
That's a good question. I think, like I said, I feel like there was just such a natural Australian culture that my dad brought into our home that I wouldn't really know the difference as far as like being raised in a American home versus a multicultural home. Um, but I do think for my kids, like I said, it's very important to me that they understand like where we came from. And I think for me, I've always cared very deeply about my own history and where I've come from and the people that came before me. So that was always important to me to pass on to my kids, even before I was married. Like I've said, I've tried to mention to them, we're from Australia, my family's there, and we'll take you guys someday. I try to point out things that are specific to Australia. We do still try to have Australia Day at home, and yeah. And then my husband actually, his his mom's side of the family is Hispanic. We're not sure Spain or Mexico. His grandma will not give us a straight answer, and I've wanted so desperately for her or his mom to do an ancestry or whatever those DNA tests are because it's important to me, but it's not just me. So I want them to know where they come from on their dad's side too. But if you ask him, he is just American.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes, not everyone's as tied to the cultural background.
Was it 23andMe? Is that
23andMe?
There's also that and Ancestry.
That and Ancestry.
I don't know what the nuances are between the two, but those are the two main ones I'm aware of.
Yeah. Maybe later in life, they'll like choose to do it on their own kind of, and they'll be curious about it. Do you feel like your kids understand? I mean, your kids are very young, so do you feel like they kind of are understanding kind of what you're trying to teach them as far as with Australia Day and with Australian culture at all? Are they interested in it? What are their reactions?
I think they don't quite grasp the depth of it yet. I think my son Gary, who is going on 5 in a couple of weeks, he'll be 5. He, I think, is almost understanding enough that I've like made it distinct enough that there is something special about that. I think my favorite thing right now is the show Bluey. I don't know if you guys
heard of Bluey.
I
keep hearing good things about it. Yeah.
So that show on its own is amazing, but the fact that it is Australian characters, and I'm pretty sure it's set in Canberra. There's this guy on Instagram who lives in Canberra, and he's done like a walking tour, quote unquote, and like shown you things that are similar in the show to things that are in Canberra. And so I do try to watch that show with the kids. One, again, amazing show. So funny. I'll watch it on my own sometimes. If I've had a really stressful day, I'll just put it on and watch it myself. But in trying to use that to explain to my kids some of what is Australia and what's special about it and how that applies to them a little bit.
Awesome. I've heard numerous times now about Bluey. I know this is not a show about the show Bluey, but I'm so curious because I've heard it's like just as much for adults as it is for kids. Like the humor in it, I've heard is pretty. Is it? Yeah, I guess like it's. I don't know. Is it just like? I know how some animated stuff will kind of make the jokes where it's like adult enough so that parents get it, but like kids don't. Like, is it kind of like that, or is it like what makes you kind of, I guess, like that kind of show?
I think it's very whimsical. It's very cute. The accents are fun to listen to, but it does have a lot of. I think it really does cater to parents. A lot of people have said that Bluey is like a love letter to parents because it really tackles the perspective of both kids and parents, but in a really nice and happy way. It's hard to explain if you haven't watched it, but as far as like parents go, it's not jokes that go over kids' heads as far as like crude or inappropriate, just relatable. And I think that's what means a lot to parents.
Cool.
And I like to watch it. There was an episode the other day I was watching, and I actually told my husband Brandon how I really enjoyed it because something about that specific episode just reminded me of being in Australia and watching my dad and his brother interact. So that was really special.
That's cool. I had no idea that it kind of had those vibes to it. So that's kind of neat that like, it's a good show in general. And then it also brings the Australian vibes. So that's pretty cool.
That's so nice that it brought that memory for you. That's so sweet. I love when art kind of like, gives you certain vibes and memories. That's great. So I have some questions about kind of just Australian culture in general, because I feel like I keep going back to this, but in the US, I feel like we have a lot of stereotypes and probably misconceptions about Australia. I'm surprised that people would ask you to say banana because I feel like the most common thing that you hear whenever someone's like, oh, do an Australian accent, they say like shrimp on the Barbie and like all this stuff, you know? And so can you speak to like some stereotypes and misconceptions and kind of things that you would like to be
roll your eyes at?
You would like to clear up, I guess.
Well, yes, that people will use that phrase almost immediately. I refuse. I won't say it.
I feel like my husband's probably done that when he's interacted with Ashleigh.
Yes, I won't do it. I would sound just as bad as anybody else trying to fake it. And two, it's just not really a phrase I've actually heard people use in person.
He's debunked it. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, there's a joke that everything in Australia will kill you.
Right.
Yes, I have.
That's not untrue.
That one's true.
That one's true. Okay.
So,
It's like Mythbusters, but for Australian culture.
Yeah.
I mean, the beaches are gorgeous. I don't think nothing comes to mind that's not been like somebody's asked me a question and I'm like, that's so far off base from reality. Because I think Australians themselves are pretty transparent people. They're pretty chill. What you see is what you get. So I feel like a lot of the information you get as far as like a lot of things are deadly is true. It's a beautiful place to live. And people are generally pretty relaxed, which I think is one thing I miss the most.
Yeah. That's what I've seen just in interviews of Australian either celebrities or like athletes. It's just they just seem so chill and laid back, and it sounds like that maybe holds true. I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't have the same like live to work culture that we have in the US, I feel like, as much. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, I just feel like here in the US I feel like we're stressed a lot and they seem so much more relaxed.
It's a pretty slow pace, I think.
Yeah, that's cool.
Even in the city, I didn't feel like I was rushed to be anywhere.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Nice.
That's kind of cool.
Well, one thing I have heard just from like watching, like, I don't know, like BuzzFeed videos where they kind of like debunk things about different countries and stuff. Australians seem to get kind of annoyed about the idea that they drink Fosters as well. Like,
Yeah. So I think that was, no, I don't know that I ever actually met anyone that drank Fosters. I think it is like branded as Australia's beer, and that's not the case. I don't think I've ever seen anybody drink Fosters.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Can you tell us about some typical Australian foods? We kind of talked about the pavlova, and you said how you used to eat chips and a sandwich kind of thing, that sounds very like Australian/British to me. So yeah, what are some like typical Australian foods, I guess?
So I guess, chips. It's not like potato chips. It's French fries, but they're like steak fries. They're just kind of thicker and seasoned really well. So yeah, when I would go home, I'd go to the shop and I'd get a nice hot bag of chips and a loaf of bread and some ketchup and make a little sandwich. And that would be one of my late night snacks. I'm trying to think. Lamb, prawns. I think we were in Australia for Christmas once, and we celebrated with a barbecue and prawns, and that was delicious.
It's because the seasons are opposite, aren't they?
Barbecue, Christmas barbecue.
Okay, I was like, wait, barbecue? And I was like, oh, yes, that makes sense.
Yeah. I know my dad would joke about having growing up with Santa in the full beard and Santa hat and swim trunks.
Yeah, I mean, we understand that from growing up in Miami too, but it's different in Australia as well, being warm in wintertime.
All right, so kind of piggybacking off the food conversation, I've heard a lot about Vegemite. Can you just tell me like what it is and do you like eating it?
Okay, so as far as Vegemite goes, that is where I draw the line on my Australian citizenship. I do not like Vegemite. It's disgusting. I can't even stand the smell of it. My dad will eat it. I think primarily most people eat it on toast, a very thin layer. You don't go heavy on that. A little butter and a little toast. I think my sister, my twin sister actually eats it as well. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure she's had she eats it occasionally. How would you explain it? It's very salty.
Okay.
What it is, I don't know. It is brown, it is gooey, it is salty, and it is pungent.
Okay. It's not aesthetically pleasing. Okay.
I don't love it.
So it's a love it or hate it kind of thing. It seems like, yeah.
And I think you could get it at McDonald's. In Australia, you can get it at McDonald's
That's
in small
amazing.
little packets like you would get ketchup. I think I was in third grade maybe when we went on our trip where we were there for Christmas, and we brought some back, and one of our we passed it out, and of course it was the boys who were like super confident that they're going to try it and be totally fine. And one friend who we were adamant just taste a little bit took a full scoop of it and immediately ran to the bathroom and threw up. So I don't recommend it as an Australian experience, but you know, if you wanted to go for it, go for it.
Awesome.
Yeah. So can you tell us about any like stories that your dad maybe told you about growing up in Australia?
Yes. I think my dad, I mean, he was a bit mischievous, so there's not a lot of stories I think he's been willing to tell.
Fair.
Most of his stories do come from his traveling. But when we would drive from, like I said, we'd go to Ulladulla, where my Nana lived, in this beautiful little pink house that, if I remember right, my granddad and her built.
Oh, wow.
They had a banana tree in the backyard, and
If you said banana, it was normal.
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And we'd drive from Ulladulla to Canberra, and you know, we'd take the same route, and there was Pooh's Corner. We'd be driving this windy road, and it's just nothing's around, just trees and like cliffside and whatnot. And there's this little tucked away spot in the corner of the road that's just got a lot of Pooh bears. I don't know why, but it's Pooh's Corner. So we'd see that driving down. There's a bakery, Braidwood Bakery. We would stop there every time and get some baked goods and treats. I actually talked to a friend of mine whose family is from Canberra, and he would drive down to Ulladulla, and they would stop at the same bakery. Actually, he was a friend of mine at college and one of the first people I met, and I think I had called my dad and I said, hey, I met this guy at college. He's really nice. And we found out that my dad and his dad were actually friends.
Oh my gosh.
I think they were on the
Wow.
ship together.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh my god.
Small world.
And so that was crazy. But yeah, so he had the same kind of memories going down to
Yeah.
Ulladulla as I would from coming from Ulladulla to Canberra. And then Dad would obviously point out tackle shops and places he used to go as a kid with his brother and sister.
Nice.
Oh,
That's
so
cool.
nice. Yeah, that's really cool. I guess to kind of start wrapping up, just some basic questions. We'll start. There's a negative one and there's a positive. So we'll start with the negative first. Is there anything that you dislike about Australian culture at all?
I think the only thing, and I hope I'm referencing this correctly, is they have this thing called like tall poppy syndrome, which they think if anybody's getting like somebody who just seems to be succeeding or feeling too good about themselves or something, they want to cut them down to size. Like everyone's on the same level. There's an even playing field. You don't get to feel that great about yourself, which is kind of like, I've heard the phrase, and I would say living there, you know, I had some very encouraging friends. Yes. I had some wonderful people in my world living there, but I had seen that kind of attitude from other people towards people who were successful or feeling really good about themselves. So that's the thing. Outside of that, though, nothing else really comes to mind that quickly.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. Yeah. That's really fascinating. And the one side, you know, it's good. It kind of breeds a sense of equality, I guess. But on the other hand, yeah, then you never get to feel good about your success. So, yeah, I can see how that can be kind of a double-edged sword there. And for, you know, the most positive part, what do you love the absolute most about Australia?
Hard to pick one.
You can pick more than one.
Yeah. I think it might sound cheesy, but far and above the fact that I have family there.
Yeah.
That is probably my favorite thing. Next to that, just the kind of laid back culture, the relaxed vibes. It's easy to talk to people that you just meet. It's very friendly, but in a different way. Like, I grew up in Oregon, and they're very friendly people, and the South is pretty friendly, but Australia just had a very different way of being friendly, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, everyone's included. And you don't have to wait for an invitation to a party. You just kind of assume you're invited. So I do miss that a lot. I feel like it was easy to meet people over there. And the beaches. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll always miss the beaches.
Yeah, great. All right. I think that's most of what we wanted to kind of talk about. Do you have any other questions, Melissa?
No, I don't think so. I just want to thank you so much for
Thank
being
you
willing
for
to open up.
doing
Like, I just
this.
learned some. Yeah, it's really cool to hear the beginnings of your dad and how that's really like, I don't know, been passed down to you and had such a large impact on you and your life. So yeah, thank you so much for just being willing to share your story with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much to Ashleigh for taking the time for this interview. It was great to learn more about what it's like to be from the land down under and hear about her Australian roots. Thank you, listeners, for tuning into the show. We hope you'll join us for another episode coming soon. As a new podcast, we would really appreciate it if you left us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any other podcast player of your choice. It would really help us out and spread the word of the wonderful stories of our guests. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.